it's not as good as Manhunter. We're not going to get an up to an hour long video on the Silence of the Lambs as AOD had done so for Manhunter. But I do really, really like the Silence of the Lambs. I once claimed that, despite Manhunter existing, and this is a claim which could be thrown at Manhunter by some uninspired hacks, the Silence of the Lambs is the one that's too cinematic for its own good. And it's too cinematic for its own good within a certain Hollywood mainstream paradigm. I'm more talking about scenes of dramatic intensity. Sometimes the music edits close-ups all spiral together with one another, and they become very contrived and loud in a film which has great dashes of subtlety otherwise, or at least a kind of tastefulness. And I know that to use tastefulness in regard to this film is both kind of seemingly contradictory and morbid. Now, I don't think we can stress enough how Lecter Hopkins, that's considered a very great performance. I almost think Jodie Foster's the more impressive one here, not because it's even a better performance, that's subjective, but Hopkins has been a trained thespian for a couple of decades now, and Foster was known as a child actress. She was good in Taxi Driver. She displayed a level of maturity which was unlike someone of her age, perhaps, even an actress or actress in training. But Clarice Starling wound up becoming one of the most iconic and revered characters in the history of female characters on screen. Now, unfortunately, part of the reason why this film is discussed today is in negative terms. Despite the film taking lengths to ensure that the audience is aware that no, Buffalo Bill he's not a transsexual. It's not meant to be this stigmatized attack on the transsexual community in the way that even a film like Psycho kind of unknowingly played into that back in 1960. It was a different time. I think people who fingerwag about Psycho need to grow up and get a life, frankly. And I kind of feel the same way, perhaps even more so. Not more so. I'm not more fond of Silence of the Lambs than I am of Psycho. But Silence of the Lambs did try to be sensitive about it. It may have been hapless, although there was an effort made. I think just tarnishing Silence of the Lambs is more of a tabloid take than, simply, sometimes people of a certain disposition were mistreated in culture and society over the years and decades. It's like, okay, but everyone agrees with that, so rather than we'll just be provocative and say, oh, this classic film is bad because it hurt my feelings. And it's just like, your subjective wills and toils in this world are so finite compared to the grand scheme of things. And I wish you all the best in your personal life. I wish I could wave a magic wand and cure you of all your miseries. But, you're kind of, any kind of, reputation hounding, I just shake my head at it. I think it's a waste of time, unfortunately. But Silence of the Lambs, not a waste of time. If you've never seen this film, you may be surprised how genuinely effective it is. It isn't just hype. But then the more you think about it, the more you realize it does belong to some sort of potentially contrived cinematic tradition. Maybe because of how much it inspired the culture in terms of putting together crime scene investigation, cops versus robbers films. It influenced them to this day, television and on film. Jonathan Demme's direction, his use of these very coordinated, considered, symmetrical, precise close-ups, it's extremely cinematic in a traditional sense. It's not to be considered confusing that I know this guy's contentious and in some ways just baffling, particularly given the praise of the likes of Adam Sandler and the 21st century Eddie Murphy pictures. But Armand White, who claimed that the three directors that ought to be studied I'm getting one of them. I think it's, what was it? It was Renoir, Godard, Demme. And he wanted it to be that rather than, I think, what was it, Hitchcock, Kubrick, Tarantino or something. I'm not sure if that's exactly the negative. I know he definitely don't like Tarantino. I don't think he dislikes Kubrick, but I think he doesn't like the adulation of Kubrick. I don't think we ought to be speculating of, what does Armin Wright believe? What does he not believe? It's all just like, that kind of cultural mediocrity. But if you want to escape mediocrity, we can spend some time with Silence of the Lambs at least. Far from mediocre, I think. Not as good as Manhunter, in my opinion, but superior to the bafflingly terrible yet fascinating Hannibal from 2001, which is doomed due to source material which is even crazier, and the film wasn't sane enough to ensure the appearance of Jodie Foster, for example, and Demme. They both felt as though the character of Clarice had been betrayed, even in the more sanitized rendition which the film offered. We might talk about Hannibal one day, but it's an unusual exercise within the oeuvre of Ridley Scott, let's say. And now let's move on.